That's weird. Maybe you should refresh because it says, oh, god damn it. I hit the fucking button, I swear to God. So everybody missed all the cool intros and all that stuff, and the stupid blue button was still blue even though I pressed the blue button. Fucking...
So nobody heard any of that.
Nobody heard any of the cool intro music. They didn't hear me with my little PhD Tony rant. They didn't hear about J.L. Warren being J.L. Warren. Intros, smelling Irish demon. All that stuff, and the stupid blue button was still blue even though I pressed the blue button.
Is somebody not muted their YouTube window? Okay. So, yes, but rest assured, dear viewers, that it was some of the most scintillating and marvelous repartee you would ever be fortunate enough to be witness to. Sadly, it's gone.
It's gone.
And you missed it. That's unfortunate, really, but we'll soldier on. Yes, like I say, I have a couple of things to whine about.
Never took you for a whinger.
I am. I whine a lot, actually, but they're usually disguised as personal attacks. And in this case, I'm going to personally attack anybody who believes that anarchy is a good idea. Anarchists, I cannot be gentle. You're all insane. I've spoken to multiple anarchists. I've spoken to multiple libertarians. And at the farther end of the libertarian spectrum, where it turns into anarchy, you guys are just delusional. Please go get mental health advice and stop talking to people on the internet. It really pisses me off. I've had to... people may have seen me come into the debate between Ed Freeze and Rampant on Team Skeptics channel. I have had to mute Ed Freeze, block him, because he just cannot let it go and cannot listen to reason. He thinks that I'm insulting him. He thinks that I am dismissive of his arguments. No, I've understood your arguments. They don't make any sense. Go and get mental health advice.
But that's not insulting at all.
Well, no. Well,
I'm just teasing you. I'm teasing you. I'm just teasing you.
I understand. No, well, I understand why he leaps to the conclusion that it is. But it's sadly true. It's not an insult if it's accurate. It's like calling Anthony Riley an idiot. Okay, demonstrably he is an idiot. Okay, it's not an insult. It's not.
It's an observation.
It's an observation. It's just a statement of fact.
It's objectively true.
Yes. It just like the whole. And it ignores historical reality. This is the thing that gets me. Back in the day, before we had technology and health system, and we had people, infant mortality that was lower than 25%. We had anarchy. There was literally no government. Nobody paid any tax. And you know why we gave that shit up? Because it doesn't fucking work. Demonstrably. There are still places on Earth where you can go and you cannot pay a cent of tax and the government will never annoy you. And you know why these motherfuckers don't live there? Because they'd be shot, right? Or speared or stabbed or something, and people would take their stuff off them because that's what happens in an anarchy. It just really, really annoys me. Anyway.
Well, no, keep going. That was actually really scintillating. Getting you fired up. When you come in the stream already fired up, man, you let that shit run.
Well, it just... I struggle to even understand where the hell they're coming from. Like, there's this privatized police force in Ed Freeze's model of the universe that works for the general public. Really, Ed?
Bullshit.
Because as soon as somebody comes up with more money, they're working for him. And they'll come up and if he tells them to shoot you, you can bet they're going to shoot you. But let's work within Ed's deranged legal system, right, where you have no say in transactions between other people. What if somebody, you own your block of land, you're on it, you're not interfering with anybody else. Somebody comes up and buys all of the land around you, just a ring around your land, right? And then refuses to let you go on or off, refuses to let you have wires that go across his land or pipes that go through his land. That's all perfectly legal in Ed Freeze's universe. In our universe, this has already been attempted and people have gone, you know what, actually, the government needs to control access to people's properties, not private individuals. So we've already got a solution to this problem. And Ed hasn't considered that this might be a problem and that it might be worthwhile. And his other argument that private enterprise, if you're unhappy with a company's service, don't be a customer of theirs again. Really? What if the company killed me or my family? Right. Yeah, I probably won't be customers of theirs again. But that's not the fucking point, is it? Like, right. It just Ed Freeze is not actually, the other libertarian I am personally acquainted with, he describes himself as a libertarian, disagrees with Ed in one important point. Ed is willing to concede that individuals should not have access to nuclear weapons. My other libertarian friend doesn't see the need for that law. It's just this, but where does Ed draw the line? Obviously, apparently, Nazis are a left-wing form of government because they had gun control laws. You know why they had gun control laws?
Because we need them?
No, because they got to power by having running gun battles against communists in the street, and they didn't want anybody else doing the same thing, right? So, their private military corporation is fine. Anybody else shouldn't have one. We saw the same thing in just before the Tokugawa shogunate, where a peasant rose to become shogun, and he instantly made it illegal for peasants to not be peasants anymore. It's fascinating how people turn around and do that. But it's just deranged. There is no other word for it. There is nothing else that goes even part of the way to accurately describing this. I'm sorry, I ranted.
How about uneducated?
Well, it's that too. But sort of he claims to have informed himself on stuff, though his claims are not to be accepted at face value. But I think it's more deranged. It's just, it bears no relationship to reality. I don't know.
I guess my problem with the whole anarchist thing is that it's idealistic at best that the people will act in everyone's and the people's best interest. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
Didn't work for trickle-down economics, wouldn't work for straight anarchy.
Right.
Trickle-down economics is another one. I can rant about that all day. Yeah.
Well, we're living proof that trickle-down economics does not work.
Yeah.
It never has. And I mean, the
Right.
whole thing, everybody remembers, the economic prosperity of the Reagan years. And comes to the right wing will come to the conclusion that Reagan was some form of economic genius, that obviously reducing taxation, it instantly leads to economic benefits. Fuck that. Ronald Reagan was president in the early 1980s when computers became small enough and cheap enough that you could realistically slap them on people's desks. And that increased productivity many fold. It reduced administrative costs. It had enormous positive impacts on the economy. Ronald Reagan had fuck all to do with it.
Yeah, I mean that's about as accurate as you can put it.
Crafty Keela says that she can have these chats all week.
Yeah.
People are detecting that I'm not a fan of these. Yeah.
One thing I am curious about. So, had a couple of discussions this past week about what could potentially go down in the Senate on the 6th. And it's the last ray of hope for anybody who supports Donald Trump and thinks that Donald Trump is going to take a second term. In that, when there's going to be a huge fight on the Senate floor, or on the floor of the House Republicans, or the House of Representatives, that the Republicans are going to throw up a big fight to try and overturn the election results before when the electors assemble to certify their votes on
they already did
on the 6th. Well, I mean, then it's going to go down to the House floor, like on the 6th, on January 6th, when they meet to do this. There's going to be a big thing. Now, this would be unprecedented. Obviously, this is something like this is not. I don't think has occurred. I mean, it's something that can happen, but I don't think it's happened in the history of this nation. So I'm curious what could possibly happen, because because at this point right now we have a president who is over a month out from the election. He's lost over 60 legal battles trying to stop this thing. He's lost 3 times in Georgia. The electoral council, or the electoral college, has certified their votes, just not in the House yet, but they've certified it. He still refuses to concede, and they're still planning a fight. So we're in dark waters as far as this nation goes. I'm curious what the hell can he do? I'm trying to get the input from people much older than I am.
He has the option of declaring a national emergency and sending in military to nullify. I mean, there's a lot he can do to overtake this election, but the biggest one would be to declaring a national emergency so he can force the National Guard to come in and then re-host an election. And I don't think that's going to happen. I think everything that Trump is doing right now is selling tickets, so to speak. Because if you noticed, with his donation money, or with all the money that he's gotten his fundraisers right now, all that stuff, he's keeping 50% of it. 50% is going to pay whatever bills he had, and the other 50% is going into a trust, or I forget, not a trust, but something else that he's keeping. So all this right here is just a giant fundraising event, so he doesn't, lose his ass as soon as he gets out of office. That's
what it started out as, but it's kind of circled around on its own tail. This is one of those echo chamber moments where Donald Trump says that he didn't lose. And he says it loudly enough that people start to take him seriously, and they start to say that he didn't lose, and they say it loudly, and he's doing it as a face-saving exercise / money-raising exercise. He's doing it as a grift, but then he's got enough buy-in from other people whom he's watching on television that they're convincing him that he really didn't lose. It seems to in recent days he seems to have come to the conclusion that he did in fact win the election. He seems to believe that, and I mean this is occurring while Melania Trump is shipping furniture down to Mar-a-Lago, and various people are, charging for pardons. But one of the problems is that for somebody who is as powerfully narcissistic as Donald Trump is, their perception of objective reality can be tenuous. It can vary according to their emotional needs, because their emotional needs are more important than what's actually real. And there is a risk that he can. There is a risk that he believes, basically, a series of Chinese whispers that he started. He's able to squint enough and sort of believe that. But when you say he can issue those orders, he can do that, but those orders are unlawful, and the military won't obey them.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. That's why I don't think it's going to happen.
You're talking in reference to him sending troops into states to force a revote.
Yeah. The military. There's no chance of military activity. I mean, and it depends. I don't know who's in charge. I don't know the person who's currently in charge of the Justice Department. But one of the actions that he could do is start arresting people for sedition. Now
that's a little in the scary territory.
That is a little in the scary territory. I mean, obviously he hasn't got a hope in hell of getting a conviction. But if he's got people who are willing to sign arrest warrants, I don't know what's involved in getting an arrest warrant. I don't know if you need a judge's signature or if you just need sort of a prosecutor to make a determination that you arrest the person. But it's going to be that would be sort of the most efficient way to go about it, because you only really need to arrest a bunch of Democrats on the House of Representatives floor, and a bunch of Democrat senators, and any elector that you don't think is going to go your way, and then you'd be set. If he wants to make a naked power grab, I mean, that would be the bluntest tool he could use to do it. But really, that's kind of nightmarish. That's the stuff of fantasies. I don't see that happening.
Yeah.
I've given up trying to predict what he will try, because he seems to just be flailing like a drowning man.
That's exactly what he is. I mean, he refuses to accept that he's on the way out. So yeah, like I said, man, pack of shit. Fucking, I like that Mar-a-Lago people are telling him that they're going to sue him to keep him out of his own room.
Well, apparently it was a condition of him buying the property. Actually,
yep.
That he was not allowed to reside there. So that could be interesting. If I were him, I'd be looking to get out of the country as quickly as possible. And call it a vacation and see whether or not warrants start dropping. But that's just me. I can't see any effective even if there is some sort of bizarre finagling in the lower house, I cannot see Mitch McConnell actually certifying this. He's played the pantomime, but he does have, I think he has at least some concept of the the structure of the state. But it's also interesting, actually, during the past few days, Rand Paul came out and said that which should not be said, which is that if more people get to vote, that will change the result of elections, because basically the subtext was Republicans won't win if people get out and vote. So
well, but that's kind of been the narrative of the electoral system in the states for the longest time, decades.
mhm.
Yeah.
That the higher voter turnout is, it's a guaranteed Democratic win.
Yeah, it just seems weird because at that point you're admitting that you don't have a functioning democracy, right? At the point where the majority of where you've got a government that the majority of people in the country disapprove of and vote against, suggests that you're not doing it right.
Yeah.
And I kind of think that Trump may have, on the positive side, I think Trump may have been the point at which people go, there are some holes in this system that really need to be fixed. So.
Yeah, I'm hoping that's where we go with this, that we realize that there's some things that just didn't work, that do need to be fixed, that need some sort of... the electoral college system needs to be reworked at the very least. We need to think about how this whole thing works. Gerrymandering is a huge issue. So that we need to look at district lines and how to accurately appropriate representation, which the right doesn't want, because they've spent the last 30 to 40 years redistricting states to make it more difficult for Democratic win. If you take a look at Texas, the highest population concentration are blue. They're Democratic states, or Democratic counties. But because of the way that we have Texas drawn districtly, it doesn't work out right. So if we were to district Texas correctly, Texas would be a big purple state.
Yeah.
True.
So it's a huge issue, and one of the factors that I find a little bit frustrating and then reassuring alternately is the lack of effective federal control. In Australia, federal election laws are set by the Electoral Commission, and they oversee all of the elections that take place in Australia, in at least a supervisory role. But they have standards on on the size and distribution of electorates, their contiguity and their geometry, and we've managed to preserve the political independence of that organization. But the fact that you guys don't have that seems a little bit odd to me. That each state can sort of futz about and do whatever it wants, and make its own rules and use its own machines. It's one of the things that the Republicans were unhappy about this year was states making their own decisions, and you would think that having a sort of a but the problem is that in the United States, everybody accepts that if you stick a Republican in charge of a department, they'll abuse that role for their party's benefit. And I don't. That seems to me to be sort of the crux of the problem, is that you're accepting corrupt administration of government positions, and I don't see how that can be allowed to stand.
My biggest issue with with the electoral process, especially over the past 2 election cycles, is the targeted removal of polling houses. And if you look at the areas that lost places to vote, they have been almost universally in urban areas.
Yeah.
And it seems it seems as if that a certain demographic of people who we're not going to name have been targeted by this.
Yes. So, I mean, it's not just that their refusal to make Election Day a national holiday. Parking arrangements. Local police often have parking blitzes to make sure that people don't overstay their parking. There are often irregularities in the ways machines are distributed, which makes the lines longer, which means that people have to take more time off work, which they can less afford to do. There are just a number of ways of screwing up the system, in such a way as to target particular groups. And the fact that you don't have a federal system that investigates all of this, because I mean, if at the moment everybody would scream blue murder and states' rights, if any such attempt were made to make sure that the individual secretaries of state were implementing functional electoral systems.
Yeah, it's so wild to think, because with all the systems that are currently in place, with gerrymandering controlling the vote, the systematic shutting down of polling locations, making it more difficult for individuals to vote. You take all of these little clues, and it pains me. It pains me to say that a lot of these individuals that we debunk, that we go after, these conspiratorial thinkers, there is, and Crafty mentioned this before, that there is a kernel of truth to this. You can't have a government that engages in the systemic, methods of control in order to get the results that they want or to maintain the results that they've already gotten. You can't have that consistently and see it grow over time, and not give rise to conspiratorial thinking. Only I think that many of them take it one step too far. But it's sad to say that there is a kernel of truth, that they don't trust the government because they see the same things that we see, whereas we see it's gotten like this because people have refused to try and change it. They see it's this way because we cannot change it, and so therefore they go deeper and deeper and deeper. Whereas we're hoping, because every year we vote, and we try to push forward the things that we want, that we know or we think will be better. There'll be different choices. We can try new things, but not enough people get out and do it. So the scary thing is that some of them are justified, and they're kind of like the way they view the government. I can almost see why these people would be, although they are uneducated, would be pushed towards anarchism. They just want to see the whole thing burnt down. They don't give a rat's ass what rises in its place, just as long as what rises is not the same as what it currently is. Because all they see is corruption around every single corner, and that's the fault of where they spend their time on the internet, what they listen to on the news, what they listen to on the radio, their friends, the memes they share, social media. All these things are feeding that pot in which they are stewing this conspiratorial thinking, and out comes, fuck it, just burn the whole goddamn thing down, and we'll start fresh. I don't care what it is. Maybe it'll be something different, but as long as it's not what we currently have.
Yeah, that's all. As long as it's not what we consider to be the broken system that we currently have, I don't care. Yeah, and that's a particularly dangerous road to travel.
But it's self-broken, right? At the whole thing is, you've got these people saying the system's broken, it doesn't affect us, it doesn't improve our situation, it doesn't act on our behalf. But anything that's socialized or anything that you can describe as socialized is evil, bad, and is going to destroy the country.
This is weird. Now, to give Crafty, yes, she said they use that kernel to manipulate the system. Yes, Crafty, I wanted to make sure I credited you on that from the other day. But the big thing is that I see a combination of this, or I see something that bridges the gap here. There's a common denominator between these, the flirts that we talk about, the woo believers, and blah 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 blah. Is that there is a laziness to this? Is that the unwillingness to do the work? Is that they do not want to do the work? Okay, they either want the work done for them, or they want to, they want to tell other people to go and do the work. Just like they want to jump up and yell anarchy, but they will not be the ones to carry torches to the White House.
Mm-hmm.
They want to scream at us that gravity is not a thing, or that we are misrepresenting physics. Yet they don't want to crack a physics book when we all took the time to go ahead and do this. So they don't want to get the education. Because for whatever reason, they don't want to do the decades of work that many of us have put in to understanding all of this shit. And so I think that's where it comes down to. I don't want to sit here and say that every single one of them is lazy, or I don't want to say that every single one of them is so intellectually bankrupt or so intellectually deficient that they can't get an education. But it's hard to know where to land when their arguments are so specious because they refuse to do the work to understand what they're talking about.
Well, there's the simple fact is that the existing infrastructure is designed to exploit them, right? So you've got politicians who are willing to set these people up to be exploited by corporations. If they're undereducated, they're cheaper labor. You've got pastors and religious organizations who, are better able to manipulate them because, again, they're undereducated. And they drain these people for tithes. They still call it tithes, which sort of boggles my mind. And they get exceptionally wealthy off the contributions of people who are working hard. And, sort of the concept of a lot of these people are being lazy. They're not lazy. They're busting their guts, and they're not seeing an adequate return for it. And they're not seeing an adequate return for it because there's no such thing as unionization. There's no such thing as workers' rights. There's no such thing as workers' compensation. There's no such thing as unemployment benefits if your boss decides to sack you. And these things distort the labor market in a way that people are much easier to exploit if you happen to be a large, wealthy company. So you've got these politicians who are selling them this story that anything that's socialized, anything that's unionized, anything that's blunt, this, that, or the other, is bad for the country. It's un-American. It's going to destroy your way of life, and they're using this to trap these people in subservience. And we people on the left come up and tell them that they're lazy or stupid or evil or ignorant, and they go, well, if that's the way you're going to be, well, I'll be over here with the people who tell me I'm actually a wonderful person. Thank you very much. And we've got to find a way to tell people, look, I understand you've heard these slogans about unions, about socialized systems, about this, that, and the other, but it's actually untrue. And if you'll come with us just a little way, we can make the system better for you. It's got to happen. And for it to happen, Democrats, when they have a majority, because they had a majority, they had all three branches of government in the first 2 years of Obama's term. And what did they do with it? Not much.
Very little, yeah.
If that's all you're going to do, you don't deserve credit. Of course, people aren't going to trust you when you say, if you vote for us, we can do all of this stuff, because in the past it didn't happen, right? And it didn't happen because, politicians in the South didn't want to be labeled as too progressive or what have you, because they were thinking of their political survival. But it's got to change. It really has to. Otherwise, you're just going to you're forcing people. You're leaving people with no other option but violent overthrow unless something changes.
Right. Let me ask you a question. Do you think that getting rid of money and setting term limits would solve all of those problems?
Probably not all, but some.
It would certainly. I think that Citizens United was the stupidest legal decision I've come across for some time. I think that the other thing I would do is I would explore the concept of assigning political parties equal funding for advertising, outlawing PACs and super PACs.
You're talking about this like an overhaul of the entire system. So an overturn of Citizens United, term limits on all positions in government, spending caps, no dark money. I actually would prefer to do that they have to do self financing. That they can't be money from everybody. They have to have the money.
No, I don't. I would suggest that actually, there was a debate in Australia about whether or not members of parliament should be paid at all. The argument being that that seems like a conflict of interest, and the counter argument is, but then you're making it so that only rich people can become members of parliament. And I think you're facing the same. If it's self-funded, then you're giving an advantage to rich people, and I just don't want that. I want the system to be.
If you put the control, if you put the controls when they're in office, then you can eliminate conflicts of interest. And so they have the money. So what? So that money's going to go into it's going to go right into the economy while they campaign to try and get elected. So what if they're rich? I mean, as long as you have the rules for while they're in office, and those rules are intractable, and you enforce them, then no harm, no foul.
I disagree entirely. I think you can't do that. You cannot design guidelines that are going to constrain all future political decisions, because you don't know. You can't know the circumstances that the government and the nation are going to face in the future and what might be necessary. So the type of overarching structures that you're suggesting there, I don't suggest that leave enough flexibility for the government to do its job. I would suggest.
Should do. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Finish, Tony. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that the other thing that I would suggest is actually that all members of Congress, all members of the Senate, should be forced to divest themselves of shares on entering.
Yes.
On entering office, it should not be the case that they have shares in any corporations whatsoever.
I absolutely agree. How about, instead of saying who gets to fund the campaigns or politicians, we put caps on how much can be spent regardless of who funds them? So let's say that you can only have a 6-week campaign schedule. Anything outside of 6 weeks would some sort of penalty. And then B, you're only allowed to spend, let's say, I don't know what a reasonable amount of money is to spend on a campaign. Maybe $10 million in 6 weeks? Is that would that be enough to get the kind of campaigning done you need to get done?
You clearly have no idea the levels of money that were being poured into these.
No, I do know how much money has been poured into these. That's why I'm saying we need to cap it so they can't do that.
Well, I mean, but you're talking about less than 1% of what they're spending now.
I'm okay with that.
Okay, let me. I'm running into something because hit a little bit of wall on this. So obviously there was some pushback on the idea of self-financing your campaign. So there are there are ways because someone who was it? Mario said no, sorry, ugly Trump Jews. If you push for self-financing, you end up with only Trumps and Bloombergs going for the job. Now I can see that as a potential conclusion, However, if you are running for office and there are controls placed in how you run, how you finance, all the money has to come from you. All the money has to be traceable. You cannot use dark money. You cannot use whatever. I mean, you can put these controls on how the money can be tracked, and the money can to be tracked has to be able to be it has to be legitimate. It has to be legitimate funds, not shit funneled through a shell company, blah blah blah, or whatever. Not giant super PAC donations, but money from your own coffers that has been traced, that has been tracked by the government through your taxes. All of this stuff opens up. But
wouldn't it be easier though to do it from a state fund? Then you know exactly where the money's come from. You know exactly how it gets spent because it's the state fund that you're taking the money from.
Well, then as long as as long as you have the controls to ensure that nobody's trying to use a state fund to launder money. But I'm imagining that could be done because you're running for office, so there's going to be a lot of scrutiny. And then, of course, when the individual is in office, it's not once they get in office they can do whatever the fuck they want. There's obvious limitations on what they can do. They can divest themselves of their shares. It could be systematically remove all of their conflicts of interest. That their behavior cannot go outside the boundaries. I mean, hell, when actors sign on to certain movies, there are morality clauses that they have to sign that if they violate this in any way, they are toast. So, why can't politicians be held to the same standard? Sure, you can fund your own campaign. You could use your money to do it. You can dump, $100 million into an advertising campaign in order to try and get the office. But if you lose, you have now dumped $100 million into the economy, and that's it. But if you win, there are safeguards. There are bumpers on these rails, on the bumpers in these gutters, in order to ensure that your shit goes down. That you're not just deliberately, tossing the game.
Yeah, but Crafty brings up an interesting point talking about it. You can put controls during election time. Issue is they get it from donors outside of election time, which is why I think. Well, hang on a second.
Look at where the money comes from.
But I think doing that seems to present a whole issue and litany of oversight. When if we did it from a state fund, it seems like we get rid of a lot of that unnecessary oversight. We could say, hey, this is your budget. Let's say it's $100 million. You have $100 million for presidential election, and you're going to provide us with a receipt for every dime that you spend. Mm-hmm. And if you spend anything outside of this money, you better be able to justify it as an unrelated expense. And if you can't, then we're going to deduct from this fund as well. We're going to, whatever it is, you took a lunch with so-and-so. That seems like campaign funds to me, so we're going to deduct whatever you say that lunch is from your campaign funds.
So I just want to say that the highest priority here, however, we've skipped. And that is everybody gets registered to vote when they turn 18.
I like that.
Yes.
And election day is a national holiday.
An election day is a national holiday. These two. If people want to vote in the Democrat in the Democrat primaries or the Republican primaries, that is up to the Democrats and the Republicans to sort out how that works. You presumably pay a membership fee, but it's got nothing to do with your voter registration.
By the way, all of the things we're talking about were a part of Andrew Yang's plan when he ran for president. Now, yeah, he didn't win. Obviously, he only got 1% of the deal. He dropped out. It was a shame. I was a big Yang supporter. But if anybody who went through Yang's plan for if he became president, his massive plan, which in essence, every step fed into the next one, creating a positive feedback loop for the government. It was ballsy. And it was smart, and it was really, really, really good for the American people. Not so great for the government itself, because it took out of the government's coffers, in essence, and channeled it through systems, through public systems, into the public offers. So that's a good thing, and that's it in a nutshell. It's much more complicated than that, but nonetheless, all of these things Andrew Yang talked about in his when he was running for president. So maybe he'll run again in 2024, and because he'll be getting my vote.
I want to address something that you brought up, because I am deeply suspicious of what you said, which is to say that if people spend money on an election, if people spend money on election advertising, then that's money pumped into the economy. I'm not so sure that that's correct. I think that that's money pumped into advertising firms, and advertising firms don't necessarily strike me as producing anything. They don't.
But it still goes to the economy, because that money gets paid to them. They pay their employees. They may be able to create new jobs for the deal. That they pay their employees. Their employees.
Yeah, and so I would suggest that a lot of their money, an undue amount of their money, go actually. So you've got to hear me out here. Now, so the top soccer players in the world, for instance, get paid $200 million for for a 2-year contract or something like that. And it's they get paid absurd amount of. They get the top soccer players in the world. They get ungodly amounts of money. If you look up Ronaldo, how much he gets a year, it's fucking absurd. It's something like 20 million a game or something like that. And the reason they get paid that much money is because people watch soccer games and they're great for advertising in. Now, I suspect that if one person can get paid that absurd amount of money for 90 minutes and the advertising companies think that this is worthwhile, they are taking a shit ton of money and they are making the products we buy vastly more expensive, right? Because companies are paying for this advertising, and the advertisers are able to afford these ridiculous fucking sums. Like, it's not like soccer's the only sport in town. You look at the amount of money that's thrown at the NFL or baseball or or basketball. You look at the contracts that are thrown around over there, and and we're talking about this earlier. That entire industry, that entire industry that we discussed the other day, and its exploitative nature, the adverse effects it has on the athletes, that's entirely driven by advertising funding. And my question is, are we certain that advertising is worth that much? All right. Because I would argue that perhaps we could all save ourselves a shit ton of money by not doing that, right? Like just cut that shit out. I realize that it's quite lucrative for a lot of people, and it is a nice way for people to advertise new products or what have you. But for fuck's sake, it seems to me like we're being exploited by advertising companies on all sorts of levels. But that may be my pinko.
No, I can agree with that. I can certainly agree with that. That's how corporations sell this shit, is through advertising. So mass market advertising would be the linchpin of their access to, who buys their shit. So yeah, I can see that.
You want a tangible number that you can sink your teeth into to find out how much advertising, how much was spent on advertising just in the States this year, and we're not even finished. I mean, granted, we only have 11 days left, so this is not going to change much.
I wonder if it's more than porn and gaming.
Well, you can look up porn and gaming, but $263.05 billion is spent in advertising just in the States.
So just in the United States?
That's just the United States. And that's this year. That's this year. See, it's up from last year. It's up over $20 billion from last year. And we are in of course, we're dealing with a nationwide pandemic where spending is down. And yet we've spent $20 billion more in advertising.
Yeah. So listen to this. Cristiano Ronaldo is the second highest paid soccer player in 2020. Ronaldo took home $70 million in gross salary and bonuses. Endorsement income adds another $47 million to that. After nearly a decade at Real Madrid, he transferred to Juventus, signing a 4-year deal. The transfer fee totaled $140 million. Ronaldo has a lifetime contract with Nike worth up to $1 billion. His other deals include Herbalife, EA Sports, and American Tourister. And he's number 2 on the list. He's not even the top paid soccer player. So he earns $117 million a year, and potentially $1 billion in his life from one of his endorsement deals. This, like I say, is entirely advertising driven.
Okay, so here's the so you said how much in advertising was spent?
This year was 263. We'll just say 263 billion.
263 billion.
Yep.
Pornography, facts, and statistics in this year 2020. I think the number every second $3,075.64 is spent on pornography every second.
Okay, well I can work that out. That's 9 by 10 to the 10, so that's 90 billion.
Good Lord, 90 billion.
So there are about
go ahead.
There are about 3 by 10 to the 7 seconds in a year. So you multiply that by 3,000, you get 9 by 10 to the 10, and that's 90 billion. So yeah.
See, this is why we have PhD Tony on the stream, because he elevates our intelligence exponentially. See what I did there? See what I did? Huh?
And let me see. How much was spent on e-gaming in 2020?
That's crazy. $90 billion on porn.
$3,000 a second.
So about the same.
Let me see. Report for the NPD Group. Overall total industry consumer spending on video gaming in the United States continued to break records. As of the third quarter in 2020, there was an increase of 24% compared to the same time period compared to LY, reaching $11.2 billion by the end of the third quarter in 2020.
So I think it's more indicative to look at American GDP and just work out how advertising runs as a portion of that. But it does seem like to me, and there's a lot of economic activity that doesn't require advertising. For instance, the meat production, for instance, there's not a lot of advertising associated with meat production or meat transport or this sort of industry.
But don't we kind of roll it into like the beef? It's what's for dinner ad campaigns and whatnot. Don't we roll that into that?
Yes, you do.
And granted, you're right. It wasn't that's not a huge campaign. I mean, it was, 20 years ago, but not so much today.
Yeah, I mean, you compare that to say the One thing I would like to know is how much money is funneled through gambling.
What do you mean?
Well, how much money, how much revenue goes through various gambling websites or gambling institutions? Because it's, I can tell you in Australia, it's pretty big money.
Is Australia? Have you guys legalized gambling across the continent of Australia? Both or however? What do you have? How many countries do you have over there? 17?
We have 7 states and
7
territories.
states. Okay.
And territories.
I'm sorry, 7 states and territories. Have you guys legalized gambling across all those states and territories?
I think it is now. I think that the legalization of gambling is on a state by state basis, but a lot of our pubs and bars have slot machines in them, and bowling clubs, social clubs, and they make a lot of money through the slot machines.
Right. Now, here in the States, we have legalized gambling in Oklahoma, Nevada, New Jersey. I know I'm forgetting one.
You're looking at Nevada, Delaware, New Jersey, Mississippi, West Virginia, New Mexico, Pennsylvania,
Louisiana.
Rhode Island.
So less than half here in the States. Now that's one thing we need to do. We need to
New Mexico, Pennsylvania, Arkansas, New York.
You said Pennsylvania already.
Oh yeah, Iowa, Oregon, Indiana, New Hampshire, Illinois, Michigan, Montana, Colorado, Washington, D.C., Tennessee. And on deck is North Carolina, Washington, Virginia, Maryland, South Dakota, Louisiana. In November 2020, voters in the vast majority of Louisiana's 64 parishes approved a ballot measure permitting sports wagering and operations. As a result, regulated sports wagering could come to New Orleans and certain other cities as early as 2021. Lawmakers will be tasked today with a regulatory scheme during an upcoming state legislative session.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. And the thing that I find the funniest about the states, United States gambling laws, are like Ugly German Truth talks about lotteries, right? So Texas, gambling is illegal unless you're playing bingo, playing the lottery, or betting on the ponies.
Yep. So it's there are a lot of sort of dead weights, where the money is just sort of being sucked out of consumers who, to their detriment, and it seems a lot like, it seems weird that so many American voters are willing to sort of vote for the party that institutionalizes it. Crafty wants us to do a quick turn. She points out that Anthony Riley's COVID misinformation video got yanked.
Good.
That's a good thing.
Yeah.
Oh, $66.7 billion was spent on online gambling in the year 2020.
Yeah, that's online. Somebody, was it Ugly German Truth, or was it somebody else had?
Ugly German Truth had just looked for the money in prostitution. It's 186 billion US.
Yeah, well, I mean, but prostitution is not dead weight economic loss.
No.
Right. So that's a transaction between one individual and another individual for a service that the first individual values. That's not dead weight. It's kind of like buying. It's kind of like I buy video games, for instance. But I buy books that other people may not esteem, or I buy crappy music that nobody is going to like. But I valued the stuff. That's why I paid for it. So, it's I think we need to sort of not lump that. My problem with advertising is that the corporations know, it's a well-known fact that only 10% of advertising is even effective.
Right.
And they aren't even aware of which 10% it is. They just don't know.
That incentivizes the mass dump of money into it, so you can catch as much of that 10% as possible. So the more money you dump into it, the greater the odds you're going to catch some of that 10%, if not most of it. And so I see where the rampant spending comes from, because that's what they're shooting for.
Well, it used to be television ad, right? So television ad was the way to go. I think the probably early 80s to about the mid to late 90s, when TV ads were stupid expensive, especially during like big events like the Super Bowl. I mean, they're still stupid expensive now, but proportionally speaking, they're not as expensive as they used to be. But now everything is transitioning to the internet, and how do we get advertising online? How do we do online advertising?
God, it's eventually going to look like Ready Player One.
It's possible.
We estimate that we can fill a player's vision with up to 80% before inducing seizures.
Yeah. So
we need to go back to radio advertising.
So I want to say here that
this show is brought to you by Cornflakes. Cornflakes, delicious Christmas breakfast to get you going and start your day by Kellogg's Cornflakes.
But I want to make the point that the other thing about this is that when a corporation is charged for advertising, they're not paying for it. We are.
Right.
They're not sure. The money that goes into the advertising executive's account comes from their bank account, but it got there from us, so we're basically paying for the advertising that is being foisted on us. It just seems a roundabout form of taxation to make advertising companies exist. I'm being asked to define dead weight, and my argument for dead weight is because he points out that a lot of these soccer players who are paid a lot of money, have these organizations that work around them. Yes, those organizations would still be there if these people were paid a fraction of the money that they are. The reason I say that it's dead weight is because I am unconvinced of the social benefit of private investment. Private investment is a way by which an individual or a corporation takes money and they give it to a company, and they tell the company, okay, here's some money, you need to pay us better than market interest. That isn't in and of itself isn't sufficient guarantee. It has to be sufficiently higher than market interest that we are not tempted to take our money off you and invest it elsewhere. Now, in order to pay us higher than market interest, obviously you're going to have to lower your costs, lower wages that you pay your employees, increase the prices that you pay to your that your customers pay, but you're going to do all that to make us happy. And if you don't do that aggressively enough, we will take our money elsewhere and you will go out of business. And if your company in the long term starts to struggle and your employees become unemployed and your customers are left high and dry, well, that's no skin on our nose. We're the first people who get paid back, and we go off to invest in another company. That's what I mean by dead weight. We are being taxed in order to make rich people richer. We are being paid lower wages in order to make rich people richer. We are being charged higher prices to make rich people richer. And that is a dead weight on the economy. Now, people can complain. People can say, "Well, you wouldn't have all of this economic activity without private investment." Actually, I disagree. I don't think you need wealthy individuals for an economy to establish. In fact, people at the lower end of the spectrum spend much more of their income. Rich people don't spend it, and they expect a massive return on the bit that they don't spend. That's why they're rich. Anyway, that's what. Has anybody got a Pinko commie counter? Out there?
I think you're up to 16.
Okay.
So let's talk about this Anthony Riley thing.
Mm-hmm.
Some people may not be familiar with what's going on.
So this is Riley's the fucking douchebag who put out a video about the nurse that fainted, right? Claiming that she died. Okay.
Yeah. Claiming that she died.
When in actuality, when she received the vaccine, it was involuntary pain response, and that she was aware of. That was
she explained it. She very thoroughly explained what was going on.
Okay. So my father had something very, very similar, and that, but whenever he gave blood or whenever he got like that, he had a tendency he had to make sure that he was in almost in the reclined position, because sitting up doing anything, my father would just I never translated it to me, didn't translate to my brother, but my dad had that, and when a big guy does that, it's really, really scary. So I totally understand
because we're hard to catch.
Yes. when it's 300, when it's vasovagal syncope. Yes, I believe that is it. I have to check with my mother, but I think you are correct. Ugly German truths. So yeah, this is a basic thing. It was a pain response. Her brain just kind of, and she went and she woke back up and all was good. So Anthony said, "Oh, she died, and it's bad for you."
Yeah, and the funny thing about that is the article that or the video he showed about it was an article video he showed about a person who died happened 2 days before this nurse got her shot, and they were both date stamped.
I have to say all I saw was the thumbnail for his thing, but he's. I am stunned that he regards himself as capable of any form of journalistic impression. The sort of he's not a journalist. He's not got any sort of fact-checking ability, and for him to claim that is. For him to claim it even implicitly seems ridiculous.
Yep.
Well,
just the whole thing was kind of silly. What happened?
Yeah, the whole thing got shut down. So I mean, they yanked it, and heat shield makes the point. How is Riley still relevant? I mean,
well, he isn't. I mean, I talked about blocking Ed Freeze. The first person I had to block on YouTube was actually Anthony Riley, because he stalked me across multiple social media platforms.
I'll stalk you across multiple social media platforms.
I do stalk you across multiple social media platforms.
From you guys,
look at him getting all
from
red.
you guys. From you guys, it's endearing. From him, I could not be less interested. He was also.
Do you have any idea how many sock accounts I have just like floating around you? I'm just simping on Tony over here.
Right. Okay. Well,
Tony's my e-boy. And I'm just an orbiter.
An orbiter, right?
I recently learned these terms.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't even know what an orbiter is, so I'm going to induce.
You know what an orbiter is. You know what that is.
I orbit you.
Oh, okay. Okay. There's a there is this economy. Have you heard of the? Was it you guys? I shocked with this concept of economic dominatrixes.
EDOMs.
Yeah.
The or FinDoms. FinDoms, what they call
FinDoms. Yeah.
Financial domination. It's something I recently learned about, and there's a lot of ugly things you could throw around. I'm not about to kink shame anybody, but that's one. I don't know. I've got reservations about it. I mean, I'm open to a lot of shit, and I will never kink shame anybody for whatever gets them off or whatever they need to do to get their to get their rocks going or their juices flowing. But hey, open your wallet and give me everything you have, and you're a good boy, and this makes you, this satisfies something in you. I mean, hey, different strokes, different folks, man. But
I mean, if you got it like that, and you can get them rich dudes to send you the money.
If you've got the liquid or the disposable income to be able to open up your wallet and drop hundreds, if not thousands of dollars or lavish gifts on some girl that you will never meet, who will never put out for you, that's the whole point. And that her praising you because you paid her, and that praise you get from her. And if you don't pay her, then she just humiliates you. The whole object is to humiliate you and take your control away. If that's what they need, then so be it. If they can afford that, then go for it. But I don't like it because there's a lot of guys out there that are susceptible. There's a lot of people out there that are susceptible, men and women, who may like gambling, who may like drugs or whatever, may overextend themselves and get themselves in real harm's way. And this is one of those. It feels like a kink that is crossing the line into taking advantage of, I guess I would say, addictive personalities or that kind of stuff. People get into real financial straits when they get involved with individuals like this because they desperately need it, and it just becomes a vicious cycle that this individual will keep pumping money into until they no longer can, and then the bottom falls out of it because they're no longer supplying their dominatrix. So,
yeah, I don't know where I would fit on that one. So. Because I think that addiction is a mental health issue that should be dealt with as a mental health issue. Because I am for the legalization of all drugs, right? Because I don't think we should be criminalizing, again, mental health. We shouldn't be criminalizing addiction because all we do is create a giant, terrible cycle of people who use and abuse, and we're not doing anything to help it. The war on drugs has been an $80 billion loss ever since it's been implemented.
I would suggest that there are some drugs that I would still make illegal.
And I get it. I understand where a lot of people come from on that aspect because there are some things like crocodile and
flat Earth. Not even once.
Well, I would suggest ice and PCP.
Right. But like we talked about, the PCP that's an outlier. But like ice and crocodile and whatnot, like we talked about before, those came about because of the illegal drug trade.
That's right.
We had the cheese epidemic over in Plano for the longest time, which was a very low grade, very disgusting form of heroin, and that killed a lot of kids. A lot of high schoolers died because of that.
Crafty Keeler is deeply amused by how quickly we went from Riley through DOMs to drugs. So
I'm just using drugs as an example, but what I'm saying is I don't know how I would feel about because what it sounds like, JL, is that you're not looking for, but you're seeing some potential area for some sort of regulation on that. And
okay, so yes, I think that sex work should be legalized. Yes, individuals, consenting adults, it is nobody's business but the consenting adults of what goes on between them. If an individual wants to exchange money for goods and or services, whatever, I don't give a shit. That should be legal. It should be regulated. People should have a license to be able to do it. They should have regular health checkups. the examples of how the state regulates brothels in certain counties in Nevada are a very good example of how that should go down. It helps to protect the girls, helps to protect the guys who are working in it, helps to ensure that they're regulated, that they're safe, helps to give it gives them benefits in the event that they get harmed or that they can't work. The protection is what they need. The problem is that maybe it's the lack of regulation, maybe it's the lack of these protections that incentivizes many sex workers, especially online sex workers, to be as what's the term I'm looking for? It incentivizes them to be as exploitative as they possibly can of the people that are looking for their services. So they will. There is no. I've rarely seen a limit where a sex worker will say, we'll consider the financial limitations of the person who is spending. That basically there's no responsibility on the sex worker's behalf. It's all the responsibility is on the John, because that person can always walk away. That person can always
resemble that comment.
Yeah, but that person can always walk away from the situation. So, but there is a level of responsibility because there is a social, like I think Crafty's brought up, there is a social contract there. But I think they're incentivized to do it because it's so difficult to get it, because it's not really legalized. Prostitution is not legal except for very, very small pockets in Nevada, and that incentivizes to get as much as you can, as fast as you can, as often as you can. And so they don't feel the need to regulate that they could be that they're taking advantage of some poor idiot who's just so desperate because it's a health issue that he's going to make his family destitute because this is what gets him off. So it could be kink exploitation. I don't know, but I feel that there's at least.
Let me ask you this. Let me ask you guys this.
A girl working in a brothel or a girl working on the street.
Let me ask you this. Hang on.
At least with them, there's a contract there. You pay, they provide, and then you go your separate ways.
Well, but there's a contract. There's a contract too with online sex work, right? And do we consider online sex work the same type of sex work done in person?
I still consider it sex work. I mean, if you want
to sure, yeah, right, yeah.
I mean, you have your street prostitutes, and then you have your brothel prostitutes, and then you have I think there's more degrees online because you have everything from like e-girls who are just kind of like, haha, I'm skinny and I'm cute, like Belle Delphine, to like legit cam models who will pretty much do anything. Then of course you have your high end stuff. You have your in call out call escorts.
So I have to say that one of the issues here is I think general neglect of the issues of mental health, and as a society we need to be more aware of them, and we need to incorporate mental health considerations into the way we structure businesses and the way we carry out financial transactions. Now, at the moment, there's a lot of stigma and a lot of ignorance around mental health issues, and I kind of think that as a society, we need to be better informed on mental health issues, and we need to be more mindful of mental health issues. Yeah. And I mean, it's difficult to draw the line because if you're going to say that financial domination is illegal or requires regulation, you made the connection to e-girls. Do they get, how regulated are they? And there are actually some attempts. I think that there are rules about how much bare skin a person on Twitch can show or something like that. Yeah. So that there are already some attempts at sort of administering this, but I don't think that they're at all well formed or well thought through. But I kind of think also in terms of monitoring, for financial transfers that occur between customers and service providers, there needs to be an analysis tool in place to determine the benefit of the relationship, or the how parasitic it is. It's all very difficult, and I don't think that sort of off the cuff we're going to come to a solution about it. But I don't think that financial DOMs need to be singled out for particularly special consideration. A lot of people get themselves into financial trouble doing all sorts of weird stuff. Just
Pokemon games.
Pokemon games.
You like your phone games and shit.
Yeah.
People like to collect whatever, you know what I mean? Yeah, so there are a lot of things that can be considered financially draining. So I get what you're saying.
True. So I don't know. I just maybe it's
so
just
that's kind of what I was bringing up, was the dangers of getting into how we regulate those things.
Yeah, I mean, I can see. I think it's just a personal thing. I think that FinDom for me is just. It seems like an egregiously exploitative form of domination. When the girls, I mean, when it could just. I mean, I know it's still a kink, and I know that this is what works for some people, and by all means, go for it. It's just one thing that does something about it just doesn't sit right for me. When the individual could be dominant, could go through domination in a number of other ways that are safer, that are not as exploitative as to their financial.
But where does personal responsibility come into that?
I know it's I mean, it's difficult. It's difficult to determine. It's an extremely blurry line. At what point? I mean,
I mean that question. I mean that question honestly. I'm not trying to attack your position. I do genuinely mean.
I'm actually very up in the air on this particular kink. I'm extremely up in the air. I'm not one to shame. I'm not going to knock anybody for doing it. But I'm not a fan of how the door is open for rampant exploitation. I'm just not digging that.
Well, let's turn this around. Okay, suppose
let me before you jump.
No.
You're going to talk for 20 fucking minutes, and we're all going to fall asleep. So hang on a second.
No, stop it. Let him make his point.
I think what is that in the domination and submissive relationship, there is a level of trust, and there must be a level of trust, and the person in the submissive state is the one who is in control. So I think with thin domination. And I think if I'm wording this correctly, the thing that bugs me is that in thin domination, the dominant has more control than the submissive, and because of kind of like the state of sex, or basically, I guess the stigma or the viewpoint of sex work in the United States, or pretty much in many places in the world, the incentive is for the dom to take advantage of the sub, and that is a violation of the dom sub social contract. Is that is not supposed to take place, in that the sub is supposed to have all the control. But the dom, in this particular one, I don't feel allows for that they take control of it, and that they are incentivized to take as much as they can out of it. And the sub will give, because that's the sub's position, regardless of what their
2 hours later.
So I think I was able to finally
I'm just busting your balls.
I think it's a violation of the dom subcontract. So there you go. Okay, Tony,
all
stop
right.
sulking.
It's like, let me stop my sulking by saying I think you're pretty much completely wrong. It's exactly the same as in the physical relationship, the submissive has to enter themselves into the presence of the dom. They agree on protocols by which it's going to work. I don't see why responsible submissives, in this case, the submissive has to be responsible for their own personal safety, right? And the dom too. Has to take some responsibility, but I don't see that the submissive has the right to abdicate their personal responsibility for their safety simply because it's a financial dom situation. To me, it's exactly the same. Let's imagine a person who is addicted to the services of an extremely expensive real life dominatrix. Right, the dominatrix doesn't bear them any ill will. They charge for their services, and they assume that the submissive is capable of exercising control over their own safety. They don't have any awareness of what's going on in the submissive's personal financial life, and they can't be expected to be responsible if the person manages to get themselves into financial trouble by securing their services. I don't see the difference. Like if you think about a really high-priced dom, the risks are exactly the same. It seems to me. I don't see how you distinguish between the two.
This is a pregnant pause.
Well, JL's talking to Crafty Keeler because apparently I talk too long.
No. Crafty said she was leaving. Crafty said she was leaving, so I was saying have a good one. She said she was going to go back to video editing.
Well, so Ugly German Truth asked a question.
Okay, I acquiesced that it could be just a personal thing. It may just be something that just doesn't sit right with me. Maybe I'm not as versed in it as I am in other areas. It's something relatively new that has cropped up in the past couple of years, or maybe it's kind of gotten more attention in the past couple of years. Maybe it's been around way longer than I think. But I don't know. Maybe it's something so brand new, and I'm just not. Ooh, maybe that's just a little too much for me. I don't know. It's something new, so we'll figure it out.
So kind of on the same idea, thought process. Not necessarily sex work, but getting paid to do things, right? Ugly German Truth says, can you maybe address the current hype so the so-called influencers get for doing a lot of the things you talk about previously online for money? How is that even a job? So let's talk about the influencers. And I'm sure everybody here is familiar with Firefest Festival and all that fiasco, correct?
The Fire Festival, yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody got cheap sandwiches and a bottle of water and no show.
Well, they were lucky to get off that freaking island.
This is true.
And you have there were a lot of influencers who were sued for that. And why do we think the influencer plays such a huge role in what we think or do as a society? Like, what is it about Emily Ratajkowski that says, hey, go do this? I mean, yeah, she's nice to look at, but is she particularly intelligent?
I can only quote Thanos. I don't even know who that is because I'm not on Instagram.
So I'm going to answer anyway, and I think that there's a lot of tribalism. Actually, people like to belong, and they like to belong to groups, and this is actually going to draw a circle back to where we were before, because one of the things about Ed Fries, I had to block him. I ended up blocking him just before we came online, and I looked, in order to get there, I had to see his channel. His channel is just full of anti-flat Earth videos. He desperately wants to belong to the anti-flat Earth movement because it gives him an opportunity to yell at somebody alongside people who then treat him as though he is not an idiot himself, right, simply because he yells at flat earthers. And it's one of the risks that our community has, is that there are a lot of people who aren't themselves stable or bright, or well-intentioned, whose only purpose for being in this community is to find out what it feels like to have people around who don't take a dislike to them, because they have obnoxious views, or deranged views, or what have you, or they've got some other sort of problem. So I think that it feeds into the sports stuff, right?
Right.
People like to support a sports team and talk to other fans of the sports team. Did you see that?
Yeah,
Did you?
so that's a phenomenon that's always baffled me, right? I mean, I like to watch baseball and football and whatnot, but I'm not so wrapped up in it that everybody talks about, oh, we won. Like, what the fuck did you win? You won the ability to buy a T-shirt. Cool,
Yeah.
good for you. I mean, really, I like watching the Rangers, and yeah, back in 2011, I was disappointed, greatly disappointed with the way that World Series went down. But that was kind of an in the moment type thing, and whatever. But to get so wrapped up in it, like JL knows, because he and I both live in the state of Texas, and to see how crazy people get about the Cowboys.
Oh God!
The Dallas Cowboys, greatest team ever. Like, motherfucker, they haven't won a Super Bowl in over 20 years. So yeah, how great are they? So it's just the weirdest thing, that thing you're talking about, that tribalism. You get people that are from two different sides of the political spectrum or societal spectrums or whatever, but they find that one thing in common that they bond over, which I guess is a good thing in a way, but it can lead into that tribalism way where I'm willing to do whatever it takes to show my support for this or do my support for that.
Yeah. Ugly German Truth says the term is burging. Birging, basking in reflected glory. And he misspelt it Birking, and I will point out that Birking is a particularly obscure type of way of murdering people. That is so I think it's spelt Burking. But it's supposed to be very effective at escaping detection forensically.
So what exactly is burking?
So burking, you sit on a person. The person needs to be insensible. They need to be sort of unconscious. You sit on their chest, and you apply a cover over their mouth. And they will eventually asphyxiate, but it doesn't leave any of the traditional markers of an asphyxiation.
Is that called Birkin from Birkin hair?
Yes, it is. So it is allegedly associated with Burke, the famous body, the famous grave robber. So it's supposed to be, the law is that it is the way that he killed people, though that connection is almost mythological. Anyway, but basking in reflected glory, yes, burging. But people like being part of groups. We're all here, right? We're all here. We're all chatting. We're chatting with the people we're chatting in the people with. We're chatting with the people in the text stream, because I love Jessica G going on about seeing my floppy belly flap around. And it's just awesome. But we just have we like hanging around like-minded people. And these are easy ways to find like-minded people. Do you like this particular online personality or that online personality? And sort of social media provides this format, but it also provides a format if your main motivation is drama, if your main motivation is to get into aggressive arguments and defend. You can defend your chosen exemplar, or you can get into schismatic arguments with other fans of this person, saying that they aren't proper fans and criticizing them or what have you. And
that
you
shit
can do
baffles me too, right? Like, you get passive fans of whatever. Pick a music group. The passive fans of the Beatles. Oh, I mean, I like the Beatles. And then you get these hardcore fans. Oh yeah, can you name their first 4 albums in order, when they were released, where they were recorded? Then you're not a real fan. Like, go fuck yourself, man. Get the fuck out of here. That's the stupidest argument I've ever heard. If you enjoy the music, you enjoy the music. If you enjoy watching the team play, you enjoy watching the team play. You can call yourself a fan or not. That whole, well, you're not a real fan if you don't, or you're not a real fan of this. Or get the fuck, go fuck yourself. I've always hated that stupid shit.
But we do it all the time, and it's one of the things. It's sort of, I'm a Mad King cricket fan. I don't understand why. I cannot rationally argue that cricket is a sport that anybody else on the face of the planet should watch. I like it, but it's just weird. I don't, and I don't actually have. There are some. Cricket has recently started going the soccer route, so they have the national teams, but they also have these franchise teams. So they've kind of gone more of the soccer route. But I don't have favorite franchise teams. I have favorite players. Players I like to see play, and players I don't like to see play. But some people are very passionate about the fans that they about the teams that they follow. It's just everybody has their own. I'm kind of reminded of Jim Gaffigan. Jim Gaffigan has this comedy skit about McDonald's. He goes, "You know what I hate? I hate it when people come up and go, well, I'd never eat McDonald's." And he goes, "Well, that's good, because they wouldn't let you in, dick." and he goes, and then he goes into, if you have a favorite TV show or a favorite clothing brand or whatever, these are your McDonald's. They're stuff that gratifies you, that is mass-produced crap. And we all have our own mass-produced crap that isn't necessarily the greatest for it, but we consume it, and we're happy to do so. And that's what drives the economy, really.
That's true.
Penn and Teller used to have this show called Bullshit, and one of their shows about bullshit was about people who spent massive amounts of money on their pets, and one of the products that was marketed was Newticles, which were plastic testicles to replace a dog. Yep.
Yes.
So
I remember this.
Ball implants, so your dog doesn't get self-conscious about having no sack anymore.
Yep. I remember this.
And so and then at the end of the episode, they said, okay, so we've criticized these guys, but really, who are they hurting? And it's one of the things about some of the videos some of the debunkers try to take on. You're just going, okay, this woman is weird as, but who's she hurting? Right? She's made a weird ass video and she's put it up on YouTube, but nobody's getting hurt out of this. She's not conning anybody. She's not peddling conspiracy theories. She's not calumniating anybody, libeling anybody. She's just being herself. So what's the point in ridiculing her? Yes, I mean, you can get cheap laughs out of it, but is it really, where we want to be? Sometimes I feel, like it's easy to become bullies. It's easy to pick out people we think are weird and point and laugh at them. And if we're a debunking community, our purpose ought to be to to debunk, to find people who are peddling anti-science or pseudoscience and debunk their arguments, not to pick people who have made random ass videos that we think are kind of weird, because that isn't debunking. That doesn't serve a purpose. That's just finding a victim and publicly shaming them. And I really, it's sort of, we're still in the early days of this of sort of social media and how it's all working. But I think we need to be holding ourselves to a higher standards.
So let me ask you this. It's kind of a good segue into the current goings on with YouTube and suppression of channels, ideas. Like even now, people can't put in, they can't put comments with links. Like if I try to put a link into YouTube right now, I could say here, let me get a link. Let me get a link to PhD Tony's channel, for instance. Let's see here.
Do you think the whole thing is an overcorrection, as Americans are wont to do?
Probably, but an overcorrection for what?
Well, typically when there's backlash against something, or something's going on, typically Americans will overcorrect. We kind of we flip this way, and then we typically, this is how we come to solutions, is that we jump to one side, then go to the other, then just eventually finally wind ourselves there to the middle. So this is typically what I've seen, but it feels like an overcorrection that will eventually come back the other way, but not as far, and eventually they'll figure out where the lane is.
I think as long as their CEOs get dragged in front of hostile Senate or House committees and dragged over the coals, they're not going to respond with any sort of discrimination. They're going to respond indiscriminately.
Really quick, I just put a link. Let me know if you can see the link to PhD Tony's channel in the chat.
It has not popped up.
I don't see it. No.
I see it on my end, but if I were to refresh this, it would go away.
Heat shield. I'm not bad. Well, I'm sorry. These are subjects that Americans aren't good at some things, and I'm not a nationalist.
We're not good at a lot of things, but that's okay. Yeah. We don't have to be good at a lot of things. We just have to be good at one thing: being American.
Jay says, JL, quit bagging on Americans. Jeez, ha ha ha. So yeah, I get it. He's making it funny there. Yeah, obviously. Bob Nodell's Gyroscope, JL Warren. Hope you enjoyed the Mind of God stream yesterday. I tried to engage with Mind of God, like legit, and it was the first time I've ever because I happened to be there, and Bob Nodell's Gyroscope was there, and I was like, you know what? I'm gonna actually chat with this cat, and his only response to me was, "I don't debate idiots." So he won't debate me because I'm an idiot.
Because he's scared.
Well, Mind of God is very deeply religious, and
his interpretation's all kinds of fucked up.
Yeah, he's he's also deeply impressed with his own intellectual ability, which is incredibly limited.
Oh yeah, there was one panel. He was doing a panel last night where he was yammering about his interpretation of basically Isaiah and Revelation and a couple of other things, and I was like, no. You're reading way too much into the script, into basically those scriptures. And I just wanted to ask him, is like, well, considering that other denominations and other religious leaders will disagree with your interpretation, how do you know you're right and they're wrong? That's all. I wanted to ask him that, but the dude was like, I don't debate idiots. Fuck you, I'm right. Like I was like, yeah, okay, whatever, chief. And he wouldn't respond to me. And he said, I don't debate idiots, and I was kind of like, well, can you answer these questions? And he wouldn't do it. So,
of course, he can answer questions. Why would he be able to answer questions?
Jessica G said, let's stop talking about this boring crap. Let's talk about the movie Southbound and the possibility that JL is likely a serial killer.
Possibility?
Well, Yeah, I'm just going to. Yeah, it's not a possibility to be dismissed lightly. If you have encouraged Jessica to traumatize me with these films, and then you brought out Southbound, and my goodness gracious me, there were some moments in that film where I had to get up and walk it off.
And I consider Southbound tame. That was a very tame horror film.
Ah, bollocks.
You would believe the shit that I've seen. Oh man, the ones that get me were the movies that acted. It's not the ones that were cited for the like violations of obscenity laws, like the
Serbian film.
Like the video nasty panic in the 80s in England and stuff like that. And it's not those films. It's the ones where the actual productions got either shut down or people were legitimately arrested because the films were so brutally graphic in their depiction of violence that people believed that they were real. That there's no way they could have faked that was real, and that people wound up getting arrested. And then, of course, let go because they were able to prove, no, this was fake. It was just a movie. But the ones that incited so much terror within an audience that they had such a visceral response as to call the police.
So the famous example of that is, of course, Cannibal Holocaust, which is an Italian-produced film. And it's interesting because I was watching one of the films that Jessica showed me was Grave Encounters 2, which strikes me as you would end up in very much Cannibal Holocaust territory. Like, you have a week, sir, to get your actors into court, or you're going to prison.
You need to prove to the court that these people are alive.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. Because I suspect that the missing persons cases are not going to be resolved by the police, and that the families and loved ones of these of the unfortunates in those films would require the court to at least look into the possibility that these people aren't alive anymore, since they aren't colleagues, they aren't responding to telephone messages. I also want to say that everybody in Grave Encounters 2 was a bit of an idiot because they had seen the first film and they should have known better than to go in. But anyway.
Supposedly a third one in the works. Hopefully the Vicious Brothers will get that taken care of.
So Fred Knotts brings up Hank.
Clive Wells said no true horror fan fallacy.
Right. So Fred Knotts brings up an important distinction. Says gore is not horror. I hate that connection. I mean,
it's a subgenre.
Well, hang on a second.
Yeah,
so
horror subgenre.
No, I understand that. JL, I understand it's a subgenre, but I want to make a distinction here. That when we're talking about horror versus terror, right? Something to be truly horrific. I mean, gore does fall into that category. Is it particularly terrifying? Not necessarily. And so, do we draw the distinction that horror films must be horrific, or must they be terrifying, or can they be both, or can they be neither? There's an interesting conversation that happens when you get into that whole conversation about horror versus terror and what truly is more effective as a film or as a emotive piece.
But you also get into, you can also end up in suspense films, right? It's one of the, so during the Week in Horror stream, one of the questions that JL asked the question, what's your favorite Christmas horror movie? My answer was actually was a film called Silent Partner starring Elliot Gould, which is not a horror film, but it is a suspense film. Mm-hmm. And I kind of consider that the lines do get a bit blurry there, because if you are scared, if you are tense about the possible horrible things that can happen. Like Breakdown. Breakdown had me very, very tense while I was watching it. And it isn't a horror film per se, but it is very suspenseful nonetheless.
It could be though, if you think about it, because what was you had Maximum Overdrive, that was considered a horror film about a truck that was trying to kill people. Which
that was
Breakdown.
What's that? That was many trucks.
Right.
That was all the electrical appliance. Basically, everything on Earth came to life.
Right. And then you have Breakdown, which is a little bit different of a retelling of that. Not necessarily a retelling, but there are some similarities that can be drawn there about the, you got this truck driver who is involved in this group that are serial kidnappers and killers to exploit people for money, which is what we would consider a truly terrifying thing to happen, because it's a more realistic thing than Zombie Jason.
You're talking about movies like like The Hitcher or
exactly.
Yeah. Shit like that, or
if you look at like the Zodiac,
or the new one that just came out, Unhinged, with Russell Crowe, which is about an unstable guy who goes into a spiral of road rage, and how it can shit like that could happen. That's what that I mean. There's the people who are typically when you get into the horror genre, you get into, if it's supernatural horror, that can lend itself, whether it's vampires or ghosts or werewolves or monsters or mutants or zombies or aliens or whatever, and typically it's in the violence upon the humans that they do, or the psychological violence or emotional violence they do on people, and of course people, it's typically the physical violence they do upon each other. That's where I'd say is when you breach a certain gap where the violence becomes when the violence comes to an egregious point, is when you cross the line from suspense / thriller into a legitimate horror. When the bodily harm is shown in a capacity, when you either I don't know what the dividing line is, but when you
I want to challenge that here in a second, but I have somebody who wants to say something really quick. One sec.
Hi, good morning, everybody on the show.
Morning, Munchkin.
Hi, morning. How are you?
She just woke up, so she's full of energy, and she's
nice.
All right, so the one thing I wanted to challenge you on, most people, let's take a look, and I'm strictly talking about the original Saw, not all the sequels that came afterwards. We're looking at just Saw. When you look at that piece, that can be considered a thriller with a little bit of gore in there, not necessarily a horror film.
That was a horror. That's
okay. Okay, so we can say, if we say that's a legit horror. Now, if we take a look at the bodily harm that happens in there, we don't see a lot of it in that first film. We do see some, okay, but we don't see a lot of it. Now, what's the difference between that and, say, Lethal Weapon, where we see horror, the kind of the thriller, suspense, and bodily harm? You know what I mean?
You got to see the corpse. You got to see the corpses after they were dead.
Kind of. We got to see the surfboard face man after he was dead. We got to see.
Not really. Not after the surfboard had gone through his head.
What about Reservoir Dogs?
Okay, yeah. What about Reservoir Dogs?
Reservoir Dogs was gun violence, but you don't. Gun violence and a bit of torture. Sorry, you have the ear thing. I remember that. Yeah. But while violent and rated R for extreme violence, not in the realm of horror, because that's
I don't know. Put yourself in that police officer's shoes. You don't think that's fucking scary?
But that's not the position that the audience is in. The audience is put into the shoes of the gang. That's who they're in the shoes of. They choose which member of the gang that they want to identify with.
So the Jessica G has, to my mind, put her finger right on the pulse. By asking the question, is Saving Private Ryan a horror film? Obviously not. Is it a gory film?
Man, that depends on who you ask, though.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's.
I was gonna say, if you ask World War II vets who were involved in that, if they were to watch that, if they ask them, "Hey, is this a horror film?" they might say, "Yeah."
And you see, and there is
it's certainly horrific.
It is horrific. There are horrific depictions of war, obviously, but there are war horror movies.
True.
Where, you know, like Ghosts of War that's a particularly effective war horror film. So, or horror war film.
Right.
Human.
Well, so I guess, yeah. I guess the I guess the connection that I'm trying to make is that gore doesn't. I agree that gore doesn't always necessarily mean horror film or scary. I've always been more of a subliminal. I've been more of a terror fan in films. That's why I like the minimalistic horror films more than some of the over the top ones. Even though I'm a fan of Hellraiser, you know.
See, like, okay, so like Ugly German Shoot says, aren't the borders between psychological thriller and horror fluid? I'm assuming he's saying fluid anyway, and they are very, very fluid. You can get it. It really depends upon what people want to classify it as. Two of the best thrillers that I've ever seen: What Lies Beneath and The Gray. Okay, and both of those have scenarios in it that are extraordinarily terrifying. Being paralyzed while in a bathtub while slowly filling up with water. Being trapped in a vehicle that's going underwater. There's a lot of drowning in that movie, and drowning is very fucking scary. That's a terrifying way to go. Okay, The Gray. I can't think of anything worse than being eaten alive. That's horrible. Or, you know, like dying in the cold. Or there was drowning in that one too. Like virtually every way a human can go that would be horrible, other than burning alive, was in that movie. You know, dead in a plane crash, eaten alive by wolves, frozen to death, or drowned in icy water. Those are horrible. And then, of course, we finished off with Liam Neeson, like, you know, in a fist fight with a fucking wolf, which is fucking great. But both of those were fantastic thriller films. I consider them thriller, even though they have some very, very scary shit. And one is supernatural, one is not supernatural. Clive Wells says he was rooting for the wolves. I wish we'd seen the fight between Neeson and the elf at the end of that, because he's got the broken glass in one hand and the knife taped to the other, so he doesn't lose it. And it's like, let's fucking do this, and I'm like, yes. Oh my god! And then,
isn't the central premise that Liam Neeson has gone from kind of suicidal to willing to fucking, you know, fight for his fucking life against a wolf? Isn't that sort of the old, you know, the character progression doesn't really depend on seeing the fight. You don't really need to see it.
He's gonna choose his fate, and he's not gonna be afraid, and he's going to plunge forward in life. And still, you know, wolves are wolves. Wolves are dangerous, but in a solo wolf, especially when you got a friggin' 6-inch knife, you know, taped to your hand, you know, gripped to your hand. I mean, Neeson would have won that fight.
I don't know. Timberwolves are fucking huge, man.
Yeah,
they're big, but they're big. They're fast and not as maneuverable as human beings. Especially when you have a blade like that, you can lay a wolf open in one shot if you know what you're doing. And he was a hunter. His job was to kill wolves. So this guy, he knew what he was doing. That in reality, that wolf would stand no chance. Especially if it's just the one wolf. If it's the whole pack, he's dead. He's toast. They'll rip him apart. But just one wolf,
that's right.
Anyway, there are, you know, there are. Where would you classify The Gift as being?
See, the Gift is a psychological thriller.
See, but I think for me, psychological thriller is just another way of saying horror film.
Yeah, see, the one that
what
plays
about
with emotions and one that plays with what you think is going on.
What about Gerald's Game?
Gerald's Game was a horror film. That's a horror movie.
But it's also psychological. A lot of that happens in what's her name's mind.
Did it?
That's the point of the movie.
No, it's a psychological horror, absolutely. But in the end, she degloves her hand to escape. And there's a creepy thing,
So-
psycho that's like licking her feet, like that, that's watching her the whole time, and that was
Right.
real. So yeah.
So, can I can I ask a question?
Hop
What
in.
about
Yeah.
Silence of the Lambs?
That's another excellent example.
Horror film.
Is it though?
Yes, it is.
So what makes that distinctively different
Okay.
from other psychological thrillers?
It has those moments, but it is a horror film because the depiction of what Buffalo Bill did to his victims, the depiction of the skin suit, the depiction of the rotting corpse in the bathtub in his basement, the girl in the well being essentially tortured, and of course what Hannibal Lecter does to the officers in his escape.
So, what about Hannibal?
Hannibal was also one. You cannot hang somebody throw somebody out of a window while they're split open so that their intestines all hit the ground and think it's classified as something other than horror. That was a horror film.
I don't know. I think it's a little more nuanced than that.
So I think.
No, I think you
So,
cross
but
the
I.
boundary.
Go ahead, Tony.
I'm not sure that you do. I was about to say the exact opposite, which is to say that the intersection between the genres is non-zero. So there's a concept in metric space, in a metric space, that the boundary of the metric space is basically distance zero from the stuff that's outside the metric space. It's so that's the boundary of a subset of the metric space, is something that is distance zero from stuff outside it. And I would have to say that you get to points where I don't think you can get to a point where you can say that's psychological, that's a thriller and that's a horror movie. I think you get to points where you can say, okay, that's a horror movie, and I think that's also a thriller. I think that's I think that there are elements of both.
Okay.
But anyway,
I got to point out a couple of things. One, Ugly German Truths. He knew what he was doing. Are you implying, J.L. Warren, that Liam Neeson had a particular set of skills? Yes, I am. He did have a particular set of skills. This is really fucked up. I just jumped over to Google because I wanted to Google something real quick. You know what came up? Like literally, I hit the letter H. You know what popped up? Horror war film. They're listening.
That tells you that they're listening.
yeah.
JL, I would be interested to see your general Google feed or your Google search history.
You don't want to see that shit at all.
Let me ask you a question though.
Horror definition.
No, you hold on a sec. You hold on a sec,
intense
sir.
feeling.
You hold on a sec, sir. Okay, go ahead.
I know where you live. Anyway, an intense feeling of fear, shock, or disgust. A horror film is one that seeks to elicit fear in its audience for entertainment purposes. They additionally aim to evoke viewers' nightmares, fears, revulsions, and terror of the unknown and the macabre. So,
Well,
if we
wouldn't
go
that?
there,
Can't you?
okay.
Can't you? You can attribute those to thrillers too.
I'll say thriller. Thriller movies, thriller film, okay, also known as suspense film or suspense thriller, is a broad film genre that evokes excitement and suspense in the audience. The suspense elements found in most films' plots is particularly exploited by the filmmaker in the genre. Tension is created by delaying what the audience sees as inevitable and is built through situations that are menacing or where escape seems impossible. And usually involves the cover-up of important information, fight and chase scenes, life is typically threatened, or dangerous situations that the protagonist doesn't recognize as dangerous, but the audience does. So basically, tension. It's the tension is what it is. The presence of tension in the event.
But can you have tension without fear?
Right.
So, Psycho. Is Psycho a horror movie or is it a suspense film?
I actually consider Psycho is classified as a horror because of the shower scene, and of course the shower scene and the dead body, the desiccated mother's corpse in the room, and of course the death of the detective when he goes down the stairs. That's why it's considered a horror film. I actually consider it a suspense film, like a thriller.
So let me ask you this: what about
like Vincent Price's Thriller? I consider it a thriller.
Yeah, what was that movie with Elijah Wood and The Good Son? What about The Good Son?
The Good Son was a thriller.
But there's some pretty horrific elements in that.
There's elements in it, but we never see anything, and we don't see the death of the dog. We don't see the death. He doesn't actually kill the sister. We don't see the death of how he killed his little brother. We get the implications of certain things, and we get to the knife's edge of the violence, but we don't even see any casualties from the car accident that they caused.
But I would argue that is more effective of a horror film than actually seeing the stuff. Because if you look, let's go back. Hang on a second. Let's go back to Saw, right? So we're going back to Saw when Detective Singh gets his head removed. We don't actually see it happen. We kind of see it off the side, and our mind has to fill in the blanks.
He didn't get his head removed. He got shot with shotguns.
In his head.
Yeah, but in his head.
I'm trying not to use certain words right now because of mixed company in my house, JL. Don't make me do it.
What do you mean mixed?
Okay, so
there are kids around. Hang on a second. I'm going to finish up my point. Then I'm going to turn it over to you, Tony. So when you take a look at when Dr. Gordon actually, takes his foot off, you don't really see it happen. You see his face. You see his face. Yeah. You see him put the blade in a little bitty, teensy tiny bit of blood, but it was very meticulous not to show him actually sawing through his foot.
True.
Which is 10 times more terrifying than actually looking at something. So to say that, we don't see the actual thing happen, we brought to the knife's edge, I don't necessarily think that removes it from horror film consideration.
Yeah. I'd like to point out that Clive Wells agrees with me. So there, there's a spectrum of these things. So Fargo, for instance, has a scene where a guy is being put through a wood chipper, right?
Yes, excellent.
Is that a horror film?
No, it's a thriller.
Okay.
Okay.
It checked a lot of the boxes that you put out there, Jay.
Hang on a second, because Silent Night has a scene where a girl gets put through a wood chipper. The amount of time that's spent on it, the reaction of the individual being put into the wood chipper, is the person going in alive? Is the person going in dead? Is the person, previously injured? Are they going in head first? Are they going in feet first? The depiction of all these things helps define the film.
Clive Wells says if he agrees with me, then he retracts. Then.
Okay. What about?
Hang on. Let Tony finish. Hang on, JL. Let Tony finish. Let Tony finish his point.
Because it seems a little bit like the difference is not actually dictated by the contents of the film, but by a number of elements of subtext that that seem to be, well, let's ask JL, he'll know exactly which genre it is, and we can count out the other genres. But the reality is, I think that the overlap is non-zero. So is there a hard line between horror and comedy?
I would say yes.
Okay.
Between a
Tucker and Dale versus Eve. Yeah. Is Tucker and Dale a comedy or is it a horror film?
That's a comedy with horror elements.
Is Army of Darkness a horror? Is Army of Darkness a horror film or a comedy film?
That's a comedy film with horror elements.
Why can't it be a horror comedy?
Because Evil Dead 2 is a horror with comedy elements. That's the differentiation.
See, I think we're all about semantics here.
Jessica G says, anytime I feel like me and Tony have agreed with one another, I generally wash myself off, brush my teeth, wash again, and jump in a scalding jacuzzi.
That's just true.
Okay, so the work of Sam Raimi, is Finding Nemo a horror family film with horror elements.
Get the fuck out of here!
What did you just say?
I'm making the joke because the Barracuda scene. But the work of Sam Raimi, and I love that you cited the Evil Dead franchise, because the first Evil Dead was a straight horror film, and the second film,
there was some funny ass shit in there.
In the first one, there was some moments to ease the tension, but I mean,
right.
Come on, Linda's head in the fucking vice, and tree rape scene and shit like that. And then the second film, Evil Dead 2, Raimi intended to up the camp and the comedy, because he felt that that's what hit with the audiences. The explicit violence was just a hair too much, and the audience seemed to really respond to the comedy. So that became a horror film with comedic elements. The first one is a straight horror. The second one is a horror comedy, because people still love the idea, because Bruce Campbell is a fantastically hilarious human being. I've had the great honor of meeting the man in person. He is as funny as he is in the films. The dude is a riot. And so let's play on that. Let's play on the strength of that, which is why Army of Darkness was a comedy film with horror elements. Everything was secondary to Bruce Campbell being funny.
Yeah.
It was no longer funny man in a horror movie. It was now the funny movie with horror, where the funny guy gets into horror situations. I mean, come on.
Yeah,
the hand slapping scene with the dead in the graveyard. Come on, dude.
Yeah, for sure.
The scene where Bruce Campbell is fighting his own hand, and the hand is sort of smashing and then trying to drag him over.
When everything starts laughing at him in the cabin, and he starts laughing along with them, that's a major comedic element. But Evil Dead 2 still had a lot of graphic horror.
If, for instance, there were a film where somebody were to ski into a snowplow while alive, a functioning snowplow while alive, would that be a horror film?
That would be something horrific, yes. Well, it also would depend upon how it was depicted on screen. If they went in and you didn't see it, and you didn't see it happen, like they just went in like, and then you got people's reactions, like that, and
then the snowplow started pumping out pink snow in big fucking cubes of snow.
We're laughing. It depends upon how it's depicted on screen. If we see the person being ground, like that, that's a horror element. But if they go in and we can imagine it, and then we see somebody's reaction, and it all depends on the music, and the photography.
Clive Wells says depends on who it was. Was it Riley? Well, he says if it was Riley.
Okay,
yes, that's yeah. So
who was it? Jim's Mind said Gremlins.
It's on Her Majesty.
Yes, Gremlins
yeah. Jessica G says, somebody does lie down in front of a lawnmower, basically, or some sort of mechanical apparatus in the happening. But no, the film I'm referencing is On Her Majesty's Secret Service, a James Bond film. There's also a torture scene where James Bond gets his nads dealt with quite roughly in Casino Royale. I mean, there's all sorts of. I kind of think that a lot of the stuff you think is diagnostic can appear in other stuff.
I think. Oh, that's what I was to say. That the borderline may be the presence of one of the borders, may be the presence of blood, and how the blood is depicted. So that's a big thing because a lot of violent shit went down in, say, a lot of violent stuff went down in, say, what lies beneath. But there was no depiction of blood whatsoever. There was a little bit, So when Harrison Ford got smashed around, but not extreme. The same thing goes in The Gray. There surprisingly was not a lot of blood in that movie, mostly because the people were dead. It was cold. Everything's frozen. But there was not a lot of like blood all over the place. Other than the animals, like in the den, there was, but those were all animal kills. And animal blood is considered different from human blood. Okay? Then, of course, the depiction of people bleeding and how extreme their injuries are, how grievous their wounds are. Is it, I just got cut in the face like, Tyrion in Game of Thrones? Or am I disemboweled or cut into pieces like in Final Destination? Or how extreme is it? And how is the bleeding depicted? Is it depicted like Monty Python and the Holy Grail when the Black Knight gets his arm cut off and it's so goofy? Or is it like, pressurized ninjas in 70s samurai movies where you cut them one time with a katana and they just spray in this arc that's just so impossible because, ninjas in 70s films are highly pressurized. And then of course you get in your subgenres. You get into horror thrillers or suspense.
Well, I mean, there are films that are obviously one or the other. Nightmare on Elm Street is obviously a horror film.
That's a horror movie, yes.
Right, but there are a lot of films that kind of blur the lines. And I think, for me, a lot of those films that do blur the lines are the ones that are going to be the more successful because they have that crossover ability to go between genre to genre, that you could say you get somebody who's, I'll never watch a horror movie because I think horror is trash. Well, it's not a horror movie, it's a thriller. Oh, that's interesting. I like thrillers, but you know what I mean? It still has those, like Silence of the Lambs, for instance.
Yeah, a lot of people will count Silence of the Lambs as a thriller rather than a horror film, and or a suspense film. And same with Psycho. Right. I think that Hitchcock himself would rather be classified as a writer / director of suspense films rather than horror films. Again, I think that the boundaries are sort of arbitrary and fluid, and I think that there's probably going to be overlap. I think that there's points where you're going to be able to make an argument one way or the other. Jessica asked how many times I rubbed one out during Casino Royale, and I have to say the answer is 0. You're going to have to remind me, Jessica, where were the lesbian scenes again? Because I just don't remember anything. Anyway.
Oh, you crack me up, Tony. Well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news.
Okay. Before you jump on that, I have to address this. So
no, I have to jump on this.
Somebody brought up a film that I have not seen, and there's no wonder I haven't seen it. It's a 1971 Christian propaganda film. So ugly.
How have you not seen it then?
I know. Ugly German Truth says, blood pumping comically. How do you categorize if footmen tire you? What would horses do? It's the infamous Doom of Communism Christian exploitation flick. And I just looked it up. I'm going to have to watch this. It looks hilarious, even though I know it's not intended to be. But the film is based on the teachings of Estes Perkel and warns of the dangers facing the U.S. from communist infiltrators. It suggests that the only way to avoid such a fate is to turn to Christianity. I have to watch this. It looks brilliant. Thank you, Ugly German Truths. Man, I love getting film recommendations because I've seen so many. I don't often get ones that I haven't seen. So I love getting new shit. Thank you.
All right.
Not find that.
Who knows? I figured that would have been like a staple of your collection.
I mean, even with that title, if footmen tire you, what will horses do? Damn.
Anyways, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I have to go to fucking work today because my boss hates me and thinks that I should work 7 days a fucking week. So we're going to have to wrap this awesome conversation up.
Thank God for that, because it's 3 o'clock in the morning Yeah. Well, it's 10 to 3 in the morning, and I am feeling incredibly lightheaded. So,
well, there we go.
I'm not feeling great.
I have real concerns for you when we all go to Ireland. You're going to be at the hotel. It's going to be Three Beardsmen.
All right, PhD Tony, give us your goodbyes and
don't keep me up till 3 o'clock in the morning, and it should be fucking fine.
All right, PhD Tony.
Yeah. Laughing at my discomfiture too. You guys are meanies.
Hey,
I'm actually laughing at your rebuttals to J.L. Warren.
Horror movies with fucking Jessica, running off with Jessica G to watch horror movies instead of watching them with me.
Well,
Jessica G. Well, hang on a second. I have to step in as a third party in this and say that Jessica G is far more attractive than you.
This is a good point.
All right, PhD Tony, tell us what you got coming up and where they can get you.
So I have a YouTube channel. It's a waste of time. It's largely dedicated to debunking flat Earth arguments, and really, who can be asked? Like there are better channels out there. That's all I can say. I'm too tired. I'm going to have a new video out. Designing an experiment to investigate whether or not relative density is responsible for things falling. Of course, it fucking isn't. Who fucking believes that it is? And is anybody who thinks that it is going to look at my channel? No, they're not. So let's be real here. But anyway, yes, you do. But you don't believe that relative density is what makes things fall. So
that's true.
That would be my point there. But anyway, I'm keen to get out of here and get some sleep.
All right, I'm going to mute you and pass the torch over to J.L. Warren.
Awesome. Well, thank everybody for coming out. Really appreciate it. This was fun. Even without Irish Demon, we can have a funny podcast. Yeah, so this was good times. Definitely check me out. Obviously, I have my own channel as well, JL Warren. I know most of you have been there, probably subscribed. I appreciate that. Love you for doing it. And of course, I have Week in Horror, the show Week in Horror, which we've recently moved to a live format. Irish Demon will be on the next episode in our first ever Week in Horror abattoir, where we take a horror noob, and thrust a bunch of horror films in his face, and he's going to get a real good kick out of one of them. It's a melt film called Street Trash. It's going to be really, really good. I'm sure he's not going to be able to hold his lunch. But that's going to be a lot of fun. And then, of course, we're coming up to the end of the year, so we're so close. We can just get through this one with everybody alive and safe and healthy and happy. I hope you guys all have a fantastic holiday, whatever you decide to celebrate. It's going to be, hopefully it's be good. If you're going to travel, take all precautions, wear your fucking masks, try not to spread the shit. I already have 3 more friends that recently came down with it because one friend was a moron. But hopefully we'll get through this. Everybody will be happy and healthy and safe. And I wish you all the best, and cannot wait. I think the next one is the last one for 2020 on the 27th. Am I correct? I am correct.
Yep. You are correct.
So, and be sure, on the 26th, we've got Master Debaters coming up on Johnny's channel, where we will be discussing the Exorcist franchise.
As if on cue, your dogs start howling.
They did.
All right, I'm going to pass the torch over to Irish Demon. Go ahead and tell us about your channel. All right, very good. Thank you, Irish Demon. That was amazingly informative. I'm Johnny O. This is a plot hole. You guys know what I do. Hit the like, subscribes, and all that stuff. I'm getting really close to that 1,000 mark, so all the help is greatly appreciated. I hope you've enjoyed the show today. I know I did. You guys are the best part about this show. I was interacting with 3 of my bestest pals in the whole world, and then you guys in the chat. You're a lot of fun. yeah, we'll see you guys next week for the end of I guess it's the last Beardsman of the year. We'll be on PhD Tony's channel. And then after that, for the first Beardsman of the year, we'll be on JL Warren's channel. So do make sure and subscribe to all 4 of the Beardsman's channels. Links are in the description, so you don't miss a show. And on that note,